Hi, welcome to the Herbal Hour. I'm your host, Stephen Horne. Dr. Kimberly Ballas is with me today, and we're going to talk about anti-aging. That's a radical idea about slowing the aging process. And this is the first of two videos we're going to do on this topic about slowing the aging process. And if we're going to slow the aging process, I guess first of all, we ought to know what is happening when we age. So we have here some biological markers in aging. And some of the things that increase as we get older are insulin resistance, systolic blood pressure, the percentage of body fat that we have, lipid ratios. And what decreases as we age is our glucose tolerance, our aerobic capacity, our muscle mass, our strength, our ability to regulate temperature, and our immune system. So when we're talking about anti-aging, what we're really talking about is decreasing these things so that we're counteracting these tendencies that we have as we age that create the problems associated with age. There are really four major factors we're going to be talking about in these two videos that are anti-aging. We're going to talk about free radical damage, chronic inflammation, syndrome X and hyperinsulinemia, and excess or diminished cortisol, i.e. stress. You want to comment on those, Kim?
Well, we're going to talk about the free radical damage with some antioxidant activity of how that occurs with oxidation and the chronic inflammation and the syndrome X. The one I would like to bring up here is the diminished cortisol, because we hear like all of the news information about cortisol levels being high, and I think there's some like media of, ooh, this nasty little hormone, and it's not like, it's not such a bad hormone. So when you have cortisol levels diminished, it can be just as detrimental as it is when they are in excess. So sometimes if you're not doing some saliva testing and you don't know where their cortisol levels are and you just give them a cortisol diminishing product, you can actually have some negative reactions that occur, and people will feel more fatigued. And there are really important things that happen with cortisol being in balance. So it's like excess or low are not good in either situation, because cortisol levels actually help with your disturbances. They contribute to, when it's low, disturbances in your fat, your protein, and your carbohydrate metabolism. So it does a lot more than just affect stress levels. And also when it goes low, a lot of times people will get abnormal cortisol levels. It'll go out of balance when you have shift workers, like when they rotate or they're on third shift for a long time. That can really affect cortisol levels and drive it high or low. Chronic inflammation occurs when there's not enough cortisol. So you have inflammatory responses that we'll talk about more in just a few minutes.
That ties into the second one too, is the
right. Into the second, one of the second reasons. And adrenal insufficiency, when the adrenals are exhausted and they can't function at the balance point that they're supposed to anymore, you can actually go into low cortisol. And when we're talking about cortisol levels, and we say low cortisol, most of the time you just see measurements that say 8 a.m. cortisol level. That's what they measure with serum cortisol usually, which there's a reason for that. It means you have to draw the blood at 8 a.m. That's why it's called 8 a.m. cortisol. Then there are other testings with saliva. So you can do an a.m., a mid-morning, a afternoon, and a p.m. cortisol testing. And you can see through the saliva testing where those ranges, cortisol should start out a little bit higher and start diminishing as the day goes. But a lot of times people just start low and they stay low and they stay at this flat line. So that has a lot to do with how your metabolic function is going to go with breaking your nutrients down, of how you're delivering those, how you're processing those, and how you're working with the pituitary. And as far as the aging process, when cortisol goes too low, you can have neuromuscular dysfunction. And some of the signs and symptoms of neuromuscular dysfunction because of cortisol levels, that is the root cause, is like hyperpigmentation in the skin. So you'll start getting the brown spots or patches.
What they call age spots or liver spots.
Age spots. So
that's actually a sign that your adrenals are low.
That's an adrenal insufficiency, that your cortisol levels are low. And that they're starting out low and they're staying low. So they really are called age spots for a reason, because of the cortisol levels. And then in the other factor of this with the high cortisol, yes, you can have increased weight gain. mostly you get high blood pressure with elevated cortisol over a prolonged period of time. And then that can go also into adrenal insufficiency. So you've got two areas that either high or low, they're both related to adrenal.
And they're both related to stress, too.
Both related to stress. Both related to glucocorticoid movement. So that's your insulin movement that the adrenals control. Mineralocorticoid movement, which is moving your minerals, of using sodium as your mineral facilitator to drive nutrients into the cell and potassium to release toxins. So you're looking at the mineralocorticoids. You're also looking at your corticosteroids, which are your natural anti-inflammatories that work hand in hand with the cortisol to get that anti-inflammatory action going on in the body to put the fires out, so to speak. And mercury, too much mercury in your system can throw that cortisol level out of balance.
So really all four of these things are highly interrelated. They're not just individual things, they're all part of a pattern that takes place over time with aging, because the increased inflammation can be due to decreased cortisol production, and high blood pressure and all these other things can all be interrelated in terms of...
They're all linked.
What's happening in the body.
They're all linked. So you have to look at, your subclinical markers of disease. You have several subclinical markers of disease, and disease meaning that the body is out of balance. It's out of homeostasis. And those two of the big ones for that are oxidative stress and chronic inflammation. Another one would be your free calcium index being out of range, that you're not transporting your calcium or binding it, which again goes back to some of how the adrenal moves the minerals. And you're looking at your pH values as another one of those factors in there. You're looking at how you deal with protein, carbohydrate, and fat metabolism. So we're looking at all these subclinical markers here, and 95% of them come back to the adrenals and how this functions and how that causes aging.
Great. Well, we'll talk more about the adrenals actually in the next video. In this video, we're going to concentrate on the first two of these problems, the free radical damage, that's why this is a radical idea, and the chronic inflammation. So let's take a look at our first anti-aging secret, which is to reduce free radical damage with antioxidants. And those fruits and vegetables are up there for a reason, because fruits and vegetables, part of the reason they're good for us is because they're high in antioxidants. And this is why we're hearing that we should be eating 5 to 7 servings of fresh fruits and vegetables a day. And who does that? I mean, really in our society, how many people actually eat 5 to 7 servings of fresh fruits and vegetables every day? It just doesn't happen. That's one of the reasons why supplementing with antioxidants can be an important thing to help keeping your body younger. But to understand why we need antioxidants, we need to first of all understand what oxidation is. So oxidation are chemical reactions involving oxygen, and fire is an example of oxidation at work. The oxygen is combining with the carbon compounds in wood or paper or whatever, and as it does that, it combusts them, it burns them up and destroys them. Some other examples of oxidative processes include iron rusting, an apple turning brown after you cut in it, gasoline burning in your car is due to oxidation. And of course, what we're really talking about here in the terms of the body is the cells producing energy from food is done through an oxidative process. So oxidation is actually necessary for life, isn't it, Kim?
Well, yeah, and another example that I just use, it's like as far as free radical damage and your oxidative process, if you think about why does chlorine, they put chlorine in the pool, okay, why does it work? And it's not that the chlorine does anything to the bacteria. What the chlorine does is it goes over here, it's in a halide group, so it goes over here and it steals these little electrons from the organism. And once the organism, or these single cell or multiple cell bacteria, lose their electrons, they kind of collapse on themselves and die. So if you think about it doing that to bacteria in the pool, and you have something robbing electrons from your cells are doing the same thing. So it's kind of like they're going around and being mugged, okay, to get their electrons robbed.
So what we're really saying is a free radical is something that's missing electrons. So it's out there looking for something to grab onto electrons and steal them from something else, right?
Right, and it's kind of like a little arsonist too that goes into the inflammatory response when we get there. They just start little fires.
Right, because so like the free radicals are related to the chronic inflammation as well. So oxygen is really a double-edged sword. I mean, we have to have oxygen to live because we need oxygen to burn nutrition inside of our cells. But when oxygen isn't properly controlled in the body, it burns us up, like that apple turning brown, basically, or that iron rusting or whatever. It creates an aging process that hardens cell membranes, makes tissue stiff, causes tissue deterioration. In fact, most of our chronic and degenerative diseases are related to oxidative stress, aren't they? I mean,
and you have other oxidants other than oxygen. You have iron as an oxidant. So when you have iron build up in the body, or the cells or the transferrin, like these little cages that hold it, these little geodesic domes, when they have too much iron in them, that's also causing this oxidative stress as well, because iron is another oxidant. So it's kind of like the theory of having a bull in a china shop that's going around causing a lot of damage.
Well, Alan Tillotson said that he found a reference that Lou Gehrig's disease, that there was iron deposits in the nervous system tissue, and that was causing a high level of oxidative damage to the nerves. So that's another example of a free radical. So our body, just like any other engine, needs a cooling system. Otherwise, it's going to overheat from the oxidative process that's going on. So just as if you forgot to put the coolant in the car and you let the engine run too hot and it burns up the engine, that's really kind of what's going on in the aging process. If you don't have the antioxidants that you need to control that oxidative reaction and cool down that stress so that it doesn't burn up your metabolic engine, you're going to get a more rapid aging process. And so antioxidants are like the fan, the cooling system in the car. They protect the cells from being damaged by these oxygen compounds, and we can think of them as your body's radiator system for your metabolic engine. So, you have anything to add there on antioxidants and what they are?
Well, it's protecting against being mugged. They're protecting against being robbed of those electrons on the orbit, so it keeps them in their molecular structure. So, and if you don't keep electrons on their orbit, and what happens is you have an electron here and it's dancing with its partner, and this one's dancing with its partner. Well, if one of them comes along and gets robbed as an oxidation, an oxygen molecule, iron oxidant knocked it out, it can't just be there by itself. It has to pick up a partner, and it picks up a partner that doesn't match. So it kind of creates, they're still dancing, but it's kind of wobbling now. And then when that cell replicates, it replicates with its wobble intact, so to speak. So you're getting abnormal cell replication, and when this keeps occurring over and over and over, that all of these little pairs have been, misplaced with different partners, then you've got a serious cellular breakdown or tissue breakdown going on.
So the antioxidants are like donating electrons to the free radicals so that they're not stealing electrons from the body tissue.
They're actually known as electron reducers. So you have a reducer which holds the electron in place. So it keeps them from stealing from other electron sources that don't match.
Yeah. Well, there's a test that you use to measure this. It's an ORAC test, oxygen reducing radical absorption capacity, and that's a method for measuring the total antioxidant capacity of a substance, and it can also measure whether it's a fast or slow-acting antioxidants, and it's used to determine the effectiveness of various antioxidants. So, although you told me earlier that there's a few problems with this, it's not 100% correct in what it's able to do.
If you're doing direct or straight ORAC values, then yes, but there are ways that you can measure ORAC that you can manipulate it by extracting or adding substances in before you do the measurement, and it's still kind of considered okay. So we don't have a lot of ORAC standards on the measurement, so as long as it's a pure ORAC measurement, like some of the food list here, I think we have an example of a pure ORAC measurement. But I know there's some things on the market that there was just one report done on how ORAC is manipulable and how companies are using that to promote their products. So it is a general guideline of your oxygen reducing capacity, but don't use it as the end-all tell-all for everything.
Yeah, well, this is some ORAC values I picked up from one particular source showing some examples of some different foods. Like rosemary is a very strong antioxidant. Actually, the dark chocolate has a lot of antioxidants. But you can see other things that have antioxidants are prunes, blueberries, blackberries, kale, green tea, strawberries. Again, a lot of fruits and vegetables have a very high free radical scavenging ability. So we're going to introduce some more of those antioxidants in a minute, but we're going to move on to talking a little bit about our anti-aging secret number 2, which is controlling inflammation, reducing inflammation, sending some firemen in there to control inflammation. You can think of this as like the free radicals set fires, and so you have these brush fires. I mean, this is really applicable to where I live because we get these grasses, and then a spark gets and hits the grass, and the wind comes up, and just the fire whips through. Well, we get these inflammatory processes moving through our body, and that causes tissue degeneration. And most chronic and degenerative disease is caused by low-grade chronic inflammation and oxidative damage. Well, we have some internal fire alarms, and some of the major ones are anytime you have chronic low-grade aches and pains, fatigue, especially when you get tired even after you exercise, and just a general feeling of malaise or kind of just you don't feel good. That's a really good sign that you're having some kind of chronic inflammatory process in your body. And Kim, why don't you tell us some of the other things that happen with chronic inflammation?
Well, another factor that is a precursor to the chronic inflammation, like we talked about just a few minutes ago, is the low cortisol level. So that adrenal insufficiency is going to contribute to your body's ability to deal with inflammation. And again, the adrenals are also responsible for controlling or producing or moving your corticosteroids, which are your natural hydrocortisones or your natural anti-inflammatories. So when the adrenals have gone into a state of exhaustion, then you're not going to have the anti-inflammatory action that you should have. And then you have other things coming in and other factors coming in that really increase inflammation. So you've got environmental toxins, you've got xenobiotics, you've got xenoestrogens, you've got your heavy metals, you've got your pesticides, you've got your perfluorocarbons, you've got your petroleum products coming in, mercury, cadmium, lead. All of those are going to aggravate how the body responds to inflammation. So if you don't have the detoxification process going on and the cortisol levels are low, you're in a really serious state that you're setting yourself up to not be able to deal with this inflammatory response. So that puts you in a situation that you have a little fire going over here, you have a little fire going over here, here's a little fire, and pretty soon it's just like what you were saying, that raging brush fire. So the body can't handle it at that point. There's no firemen, there's nobody driving the fire trucks to come out and put the fire out.
Okay. Well, some of the other fire alarms that would happen here, the things that would show that this is taking place, is difficulty with mental concentration, constipation, headaches, feeling groggy when you wake up, having a dark red tongue, having fluid retention. Gum disease is a really good indication of chronic inflammation in the body. It's not just a localized thing in the gums. Excessive weight and cravings for carbohydrates are all things that could indicate you have problems with chronic low-grade inflammation. And basically there's 4 stages to this inflammatory process. We're going to go over this briefly because we're not going to talk about it in depth in this video, but it starts out acute and then goes subacute, chronic, and degenerative. And it starts out with a hyperactive response, and then the body gradually loses activity or diminished activity. And this correlates with 4 tissue states. The acute stage of disease is irritation. The subacute stage is stagnation. Then that's followed by depression of function, which is the chronic stage, and the degenerative stage, which is atrophy, or the withering or drying out of tissues. And we have some indications that you can tell kind of what stage things are in by certain signs. So in the acute stage, you have your acute inflammatory response, which is characterized by heat, an increased metabolic rate, elevated temperature, your classic signs of inflammation: heat, swelling, redness, and pain. The pulse is rapid, superficial, or bounding, and the tongue is red and often kind of pointy. Now, if you allow that inflammation to stay there for very long, then you get a stagnation of lymphatic fluid. Fluid starts accumulating in the tissues, and you come up with the subacute indications, which include excess fluids, a lack of minerals to move those fluids, kind of a swampy, boggy condition in the body as toxins start to accumulate in the fluid around the cells. The tongue becomes pale, flabby, often has a thick coating, and the pulse becomes rolling or slippery.
You can also look at the subacute conditions if you're using QFA analysis, and that would be in your resistivity factors, which is your solids to fluids ratio. So when that saliva number on the resistivity goes low, then you know that you've got congestion or stagnation going on in your mineral status. So it means that the minerals are high, so they're congested in that interstitial tissue, that interstitial fluid or that matrix in there that things need to go through to deliver nutrients to the cell, and vice versa, toxins out of the cell. So some of your subacute inflammatory markers can be picked up at that point.
Okay, thank you. And then if it continues on, then the tissue function becomes depressed, the condition becomes chronic. You have characteristics of lowered tissue activity and metabolic rate. You may get heat if there's putrefaction, but the skin will tend to be cool and pale, or you'll get purple color. You see that often as people get older. They start to get purple blotches and so forth. This is a sign of tissue depression. The pulse becomes deep, slow, weak, or if it's kind of that heat, there's a little bit of a rapid but feeble pulse. The tongue is blue or dark purplish color, often has a heavy mucus coating. And if tissues are depressed for very long, you start to get this withering or drying out of the tissue, sort of like a leaf in the autumn that's on the tree, and it gets withered and dried out, and it loses its flexibility and it gets brittle. And that's what happens in the last stage, which is called atrophy, where you get a lack of water or oil in the tissues to move solids. The toxins start accumulating inside the cells. The tongue gets dry, thin, and pale, in very advanced cases withered. The skin becomes dry and rough, and the pulse is weak, thin, and deep.
And some other factors to look on that as well, if you're looking at blood chemistry, is usually your protein levels will go up, and then your albumin levels will go down, because 15% of your cortisol is bound to albumin. So that's a good indicator of when you start getting low albumin, low cholesterol, and then elevated protein. You know that there's usually a chronic to degenerative state of inflammation going on.
Yeah, so one can identify where one is in kind of the aging or deterioration process, and then select remedies to bring that back up, depending on what stage you're in. But inflammation always has a cause. It's not happening for any reason. And my favorite quote from Samuel Thompson, who's an herbalist I really admire and appreciate, he said, "Remove the cause and the effect will cease." And so we need to look at the things that are causing this inflammation in our bodies. And these are coming from chemical irritation, mechanical irritation, tissue damage, nutritional deficiencies, and stress. And so when we're dealing with these problems, it's always good to find what is causing the irritation to the tissues and remove it wherever possible. Not just to take stuff that treats the irritation, but actually to take steps to remove the things that are causing the irritation. So the more we can protect our body against irritating things like chemicals and nutritional deficiencies and so forth, the more we're going to be able to keep the tissues young and healthy and put off the aging process. So what we'll do next is we're going to talk about antioxidant and anti-inflammatory supplements. And you see the fire hose there is antioxidants. So we're going to learn how to turn on the hydrant and put out the fire, and also quench those free radicals at the same time. And Kim, why don't you tell us about our first antioxidant, which is vitamin E?
Vitamin E acts as, it's a pretty common antioxidant, and it's D-alpha tocopherol is what we're looking at. That is the natural form of vitamin E. You can have a DL alpha tocopherol, and that means that it has a dextro and a levo rotary spin, and that's actually a runoff from film processing or developing that they sell to the vitamin companies because it's really cheap to use. And doing the DL alpha tocopherol, you actually are increasing inflammatory factors in the body because it's coming in as one of those environmental toxins that we talked about that causes the inflammation and the free radical activity. So just make sure that you're getting a pure quality of the vitamin E and that it is a natural soy, usually a soy-based source, is the D-alpha tocopherol, or it can be D-alpha tocopherol. The important thing is that it's a D and not a DL in the beginning for the dextrorotary and levorotary spin. It's also fat soluble, so fats are going to bind with toxins as well. It helps prevent strokes and cardiovascular disease because it can act as a blood thinning agent. So this would be one that you would have contraindications with prior to surgery or post-operative for a little while before you go back on it. It's applied externally. It reduces scarring and burns and other injuries, and that's because it has tissue rebuilding capabilities, so it helps to replicate the RNA and DNA. It also reduces inflammation caused by prostaglandin activity. So that is that cascade effect on the prostaglandins of where the fats cascade down the wrong pathway. So when they go down the wrong pathway, if you've got trans fats or the wrong fats coming down, you get different results of whether you're creating an inflammatory response or an anti-inflammatory response. And from that the anti-inflammatory response, you can actually get DNA repair or cellular rebuilding. And when you go into the inflammatory response, it can go into DNA damage. So it can actually break the little links or the binds in your DNA, and then that replicates. And if you get too much replication in that area where that you're constantly replicating the broken DNA links, that leads to cancer cells. Mm-hmm. So that's where your inflammatory response leads to a degenerative disease, and vitamin E can help prevent that DNA damage from going on. So it also can inhibit blood clotting, again, because of its blood thinning capabilities.
And also, it's one of the antioxidants that protects fat. Because it's a fat-soluble substance, it helps keep fats from oxidizing. Am I correct in that?
It helps and it helps the right fats go down the right pathways of where they need to go. So it's kind of a
keep
director.
Inflammation in
it's like a conductor.
Check. Very good. Now, there are a number of foods that contain vitamin E. These include broccoli, nuts, seeds, wheat germ oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, peanuts, various whole grains, and there are small amounts in dark green leafy vegetables. However, one of the problems with vitamin E is that it deteriorates quite readily. So, for example, if you take fresh whole wheat, it contains vitamin E, but within several days after you grind it, the vitamin E is all basically deteriorated. So one of the reasons why we don't get maybe as much vitamin E as we would like is because, we're eating a lot of foods that have been processed, that have been sitting around for a long time, that have been in storage for a long time, and so the vitamin E will tend to deteriorate, which is why supplementation can be helpful. Why don't you tell us a little about the next one, vitamin C? Okay,
vitamin C we're looking at, it's a water-soluble antioxidant, and it gets destroyed with heat by cooking, also with storage. So a lot of times with food, and especially in the fruits and vegetables that are picked before they're ripe and then transported, you're going to destroy a lot of the vitamin C content. Most animals are able to produce their own vitamin C. Humans can't. Other creatures who do not produce vitamin C eat lots of fruits and greens. So animals by nature will go for what they need, so you see a lot of them doing the greens. And
like guinea pigs are one of the animals that can't produce vitamin C, and of course they live on a lot of fresh food, and I think gorillas can't either. But so that was one of the reasons why it's so important to be eating some fresh fruits and vegetables every day, is because obviously since we can't make our own vitamin C, we need to be able to get it from dietary sources. Vitamin C, of course, is one of the most well-known antioxidants. People have used it for preventing colds. Do you have any particular things that you use vitamin C for?
I don't use it a lot, just because it can drive a little bit of an acid response in the body when you get up to the doses that you need for it to work effectively in some of those things. So I tend to use more of the rose hips or the bioflavonoids in that. Or you can use things like, one of your sources of this is wolfberry or the lychee or the goji. It has several different names. And that tends to be very potent in vitamin C if you're getting it in a process where it was either a cold process and dried to put in a capsule form or rehydrated at that point, that it didn't lose a lot of that in storage then it's actually going to be more of an alkaline balancing response instead of driving acid.
Right. I've had a hard time, a lot of people recommend taking very large doses of vitamin C. I can't, I get canker sores. Drives my system to acid. But I do find I do well with getting vitamin C from natural sources, like you say, rose hips. So some of the food sources that for vitamin E include a lot of fresh fruits: blueberries, strawberries, cantaloupes, melons, oranges, grapefruit, tomatoes, of course, rose hips, bell peppers, again, your green leafy vegetables. There's a little pattern showing here, isn't there? And you mentioned the wolfberry or the lycium berries as one of the really good sources of vitamin C. There are also some minerals that act as important antioxidants, and the first one is zinc.
Okay. Well, zinc works with SOD, and that's another antioxidant form produced in the liver. Okay, and it's important for the immune system and healing. Also, zinc helps balance our hormones as we age, and that's because zinc will go in and work with some connective pathways via the spleen and how the fat binding or glycerol combustion of the hormones actually occur. Because it's kind of like zinc is your director. It's kind of like a little bit of a GPS system in your body, so it can take it where it needs to be. It kind of keeps all of your minerals on track. It kind of says, okay, this is where you're going to go, and I'm going to make sure that you're going to get there. And you have a copper tagging system, and then you have potassium that gets injected into food to make sure that things are delivered. But zinc is the one that kind of says, okay, well, you're going to go over here. You're going to go visit the city of the liver. You're going to go to the spleen. You're going to, after the copper tags it and tells it where to go, zinc kind of makes sure that it has directions to get there.
Okay.
So that's how the transport with the minerals work with this. It also with the hormones and hormonal storage and glycerol combustion. It helps maintain the conversion of testosterone to dihydrotestosterone to keep the prostate functioning normally. But not only does it do that testosterone to dihydrotestosterone with males, we have to look at testosterone levels in females too of that combustion issue. And zinc can, in some areas, work on your estriol, your estradiol, your estrone conversions there as well.
And zinc also helps the immune system, which again, one of the factors in aging is decreased immunity. So zinc is very important for that, and especially important for men with the prostate, because men lose zinc with every ejaculation, and lack of zinc can cause prostate problems, and that's of course one of the common things that happens to men as they age.
And zinc also polarizes the glucose molecule, so it's going to help with insulin resistance.
Oh, so it also works with the diabetic issue, which is another one of the factors in aging. Now, some of the food sources for this nutrient include wheat germ, pumpkin seeds, black-eyed peas, eggs, red meat, oysters, shellfish, and tofu. There's a lot of zinc in some of these seafoods. And of course, I think a lot of times, sometimes vegetarians get short on zinc because they aren't getting those animal food sources, which are a little more concentrated in the nutrients. The next mineral is another important one for controlling oxidation, and that's selenium.
Selenium, and it's especially effective with transport for the vitamin E, so we need to keep that in mind, that your vitamin E usually needs selenium. It works as an anti-cancer nutrient, and the way that it does that is because of the protective function with the DNA, of how you're getting that DNA replication like we talked about with the vitamin E. It increases that effectiveness of vitamin E. It helps restore immunity in the elderly. It can help alleviate hot flashes and other symptoms of menopause, and that's because selenium kind of, again, zinc is kind of like your GPS telling things where to go and how it's going to get there, and selenium's kind of like the driver that's operating the GPS. So it kind of says, okay, well, we're going to, after we get to where you tell us we're going to go, this is what I'm going to tell them to do. I'm going to tell them where to park the car. So it helps, also helps protect the body from harmful fats, so like those trans fats. You use selenium as a protective mechanism for that. It helps to flush out mercury or detoxify mercury and cadmium in the body. And it also helps with unbound calcium. And that's another one of your subclinical markers to aging and disease, is free excess calcium. So you have this predicted calcium index. 55% of the calcium in your body should be bound. If it's not bound, again, we're back to the bull in the china shop theory, because unbound calcium can deposit as kidney stones, gallstones, bone spurs, and plaque in the arteries. So plaque on the teeth is a good indication of what's going on in the arteries with arterial sclerosis. And the unbound calcium is going to start plaquing if there's any type of underlying chronic inflammation going on in the body. So when you have this calcium, take calcium supplements over and over and over, that's not necessarily a great thing, because if your calcium's not binding, which usually it won't without the presence of selenium and boron and silica and all of the other minerals that are required for transport and delivery of the calcium. So it's not just about putting calcium in, it's about what the calcium's going to do once you get it in. So you have to make sure that the proper mechanisms are in place in order for it to be transported and delivered and deposited where it needs to go. Otherwise, you have detrimental actions going on in the body that are going to be some of your underlying factors to the aging process. So free calcium index does go hand in hand with the chronic inflammation and with the oxidation process.
Okay. Well, just quickly, there's some food sources of selenium that we can put up here. Brazil nuts, wheat germ, some whole grains, tuna, seafood, brewer's yeast, fresh garlic, mushrooms, and organ meats. Now, let's talk about another important antioxidant, alpha lipoic acid.
Alpha lipoic acid is actually a disulfide compound, and that it's a cofactor in energy producing reactions. So, okay, what does that mean? That means that alpha lipoic acid actually uses N-acetylcysteine. They kind of work hand in hand with a glutathione response. So when you have glutathione in the body, what glutathione does is it helps to detoxify your xenobiotics, your xenoestrogens, some of the more toxic compounds, and helps with removal of those. Your alpha lipoic acid does rely a little bit on some polyphenol action to help do this conversion into the glutathione. The N-acetylcysteine gets converted into glutathione, and that actually helps with this methylation phase 2 detoxification in the liver. So it's processing some of the toxins out different pathways. It also interacts in a detoxification pathway through some sulfation that occurs in the liver. So this helps to synthesize the glutathione, the sulfation pathway in the liver. And then vitamin C is kind of what holds that stable for the glutathione to be used. So it all works hand in hand as this process with the alpha lipoic acid. So alpha lipoic acid is an antioxidant. It's an antioxidant recycling agent. It enhances vitamin C, vitamin E, and glutathione. It's the only antioxidant that can recycle itself. So that means that you're not losing it as rapidly, and it can help hold, like you said, the vitamin C in solution. So it helps with detoxification in the liver. It also it helps the cells take on glucose a lot quicker, so that it can get more energy production going in the ATP. In the ATC cycle, the TCA cycle, sorry. And it helps remove heavy metals and environmental toxins, and the organophosphates especially. And then we talked about the xenobiotics and the xenoestrogens. It works with that. It redirects calories away from the fat production and redirects them towards energy production. So it really trains the body to run off fats and not run so much directly reliant off from insulin. And when we're running off fats, then we're detoxifying in the body. You're breaking down the fat that's bound with these toxins. So you're retraining the body how it's going to run its energy mechanisms. And when you do that, you tend to get less of that crash and burn scenario too when you're doing the high glycemics. It also, alpha lipoic acid protects the liver. It supports the myocardial function and increases energy flow to the brain and the muscles during exercise. So this is a really good one to take if you're getting that chronic fatigue or feeling really just wiped out after your workout. Try doing the alpha lipoic acid before working out, and you should feel a little bit more rejuvenated, that you're not just totally wiped out after your workout. It also crosses the blood-brain barrier to increase the levels of the glutathione in the brain. So it does that in protecting the brain. So you're not getting that free radical damage in the brain, and you're not getting the electrons robbed there. So that means that you have nerve impulse pathways that are connecting like they should.
Which
so
helps
that
protect against Parkinson's,
Alzheimer's,
dementia, and so forth.
Right, and it also helps with foggy thinking and just general forgetfulness and things like you just feel like you're not yourself lately, and alpha lipoic acid can increase the energy production to the cells so that you have a little bit more neurotransmitter connectivity there. So some of the things that's going to help with when you're using alpha lipoic acid is hypoglycemia, or the syndrome X, hyperinsulinemia. It does help with diabetes, and again, it helps because the glucose transport and helping the body recognize the glucose, the cells take the glucose up quicker. Heavy metal or pesticide poisoning, which, poisoning, gosh, we all have like heavy metals or exposure to pesticides, so it's almost like a large percentage of us fit in the poisoning category. Stroke prevention. And that, again, goes back to some of that insulin-related issue with the stroke. Prevention of dementia, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's we just talked about, and also slows the development of heart disease. And it does that by helping to regulate the C-reactive protein and, more importantly, the hemoglobin A1C factor. So if you're working with elevated hemoglobin A1C, then alpha lipoic acid has been shown to help reduce those numbers to get them back into normal range.
Great. Another important antioxidant is the Proanthocyanidins, more commonly known as pycnogenol or grapevine. And these are actually condensed tannins with powerful antioxidant capabilities, and they're related to flavonoids. They were originally extracted from French maritime pine bark, and then later they were found in grape seeds. And like I mentioned, they're sold under the trade names pycnogenol or grapevine. So you want to tell us a little bit about, let's first of all look at the food sources of these. There are actually other foods that contain these compounds. Besides the grape skins and the red wine, they're found in green and black tea, in bilberries, cranberries, elderberries, black currants, apples, almonds, and also in chocolate, interestingly enough. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you use these for?
Well, on the proanthocyanidins, you can use them for arthritis, cancer prevention, macular degeneration, Parkinson's, healing from surgery, because they help with tissue repair. And the reason they help with tissue repair is because they're keeping those electrons, like we talked about, dancing with their partner. They're keeping them in orbit. So they're what's called electron reducers, so it keeps them from trading out. So some of the supplements that have the pycnogenols in them are the high potency grapevine, and this is a 60 milligram content of the proanthocyanidins. The grapevine with protectors is a little bit less amount, but it has the other antioxidants in there, like the vitamin C. It actually has the broccoli, the cruciferous vegetables, the turmeric, the rosemary, the carrot, the tomato. So that puts a little bit more of your natural antioxidant activity in with the colors. And then proanthocyanidins, the 10 milligram, are the antioxidants with grapevine. And they also have the beta-carotene, the vitamin C, and then vitamin E, and that has a little bit of an adaptogen in there for the licorice root. Okay.
And green tea is very closely related because it's also in the same class of compounds. So I know you use green tea. Tell us a little bit about.
Now, I use the green tea a lot with people. Well, especially not only just drinking it, but taking the green tea extract, which is what we're going to talk about. And that is a standardized extract of the green tea. So it contains catechins, which are a polyphenol. Polyphenols actually help the N-acetylcysteine in that sulfation pathway in the liver convert the N-acetylcysteine to glutathione. And that's what we were talking about before, of holding the glutathione in solution there so that it can work and do what it's supposed to do. The green tea also supports the immune and the cardiovascular system, and it's actually 200 times stronger than vitamin E as an antioxidant. They do different things, but the green tea itself has more antioxidant capabilities. It also helps, if you're taking green tea before you go out in the sun, it helps prevent getting so sunburned as well, but you have to do higher quantities of it. So you have to do about 5 to 6 capsules about an hour before going out in the sun to really help with that. But it's kind of nice, if you're just sipping cold green tea while you're in the warmer climates, if you're going to be out in the sun, can help act somewhat as well. So it's about keeping the glutathione conversion going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, another antioxidant is SOD, or superoxide dismutase. This is an important enzyme that is produced in our bodies that scours up what are called superoxide radicals. And SOD it can help protect the body from arthritis, cancer, and other diseases by boosting the immune system. Now, the gliadin is a glycoprotein that's found in wheat and other grains that actually helps deliver the SOD into the body, because the body would tend to break it down if you didn't have something to bind with it. There's a target immune formula that we had at one time that had the precursors to this SOD enzyme, and some of the research that was shown on that, how it helped animals' immune systems, it helped actually have a cancer protecting effect. When you up SOD levels, it really protects the body against cancer. SOD deteriorates very rapidly in foods. It's in foods like broccoli, but I had a researcher tell me once that 10 minutes after you cut a piece of broccoli off the plant, 90% of the SOD is gone. It's also found in barley grass, wheatgrass, which is part of the reason probably why those fresh juices from those grasses are so helpful as antioxidant remedies. And I also read once that there's a bacteria that lives in nuclear reactors, and it has the highest levels of SOD in its cells of any living organism, which indicates that SOD may help prevent against radiation damage. Why don't you tell us about CoQ10? That's a really important antioxidant that can be beneficial for anti-aging.
You have antioxidant structures that kind of work from the skin in when we're looking at different things. CoQ10 is found in the mitochondria of the cells as well, and there's a depletion of CoQ10 with people on statin drugs. So anybody doing a statin drug, it's going to take CoQ10 out of the cellular structure, and it's because it decreases the glycerol combustion in the mitochondria of the cell, so then you're dispersing the CoQ10, it's not existent, so you have to replace that in doing statins, or just don't do statins. So also the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory activity of CoQ10, it helps to aid cellular energy and detoxification. CoQ10 is very important in keeping a lot of your other coenzyme links in place, because CoQ10 helps kind of like with a coenzyme A factor, and when that coenzyme A factor gets like bumped out of solution, it's usually bumped out by mercury or heavy metals or perchlorocarbons or fluorocarbons, things like that. So CoQ10 kind of holds this whole little chain of events in place. It's like the little linking system that's in there. It's also really good, and which is probably the most common use for it, is for cardiovascular issues, and it helps with gum disease as well, because if you're looking at gum tissue, you're also looking the same thing going on with some of the cardiovascular tissue. It helps with the side effects of chemotherapy, and again, it's because it holds that other enzyme in place, so it keeps everything sequencing like it should, so it can flush the toxins out. The bleeding gums, the liver problems, Parkinson's disease, and emphysema. So if it's, in a sequence, all of your coenzymes are in sequencing loops. So when it's held in solution like it's supposed to be, or held in that sequencing and those folation chains and everything's occurring and combusting like it's supposed to, and then you're putting the CoQ10 in to help with those harmful side effects like the chemotherapy again, the heavy metals, things like that, then you're protecting yourself from environmental toxins.
Okay. Well, CoQ10 is also used for congestive heart failure, in other words, for helping to repair the heart after it's been damaged. And it's a really good preventative remedy for people over 50 who have a risk for heart disease. It's depleted by blood thinners, diuretics, and as you mentioned, statin drugs, blood pressure medications, and some antidepressants. Now that's really interesting because blood thinners, diuretics, statin drugs, and blood pressure medications are all things that people are being given supposedly to prevent them from getting cardiovascular disease. And yet all of these things are depleting an important nutrient that's protecting the cardiovascular system from oxidative stress. I know that since I turned 50, I started taking CoQ10, and it's interesting, I get these little veins that were showing up in my skin or my nose, and it's been clearing those up. And I think it's a really important thing for people to think about as they're getting older, to something to protect your cardiovascular system. You have to take it for 1 to 3 months before you're going to start seeing effects. So this is a long-term, slow cumulative remedy. There is some CoQ10 in foods. These are some of the foods that contain it. Eggs, nuts, dark green leafy vegetables, they just keep showing up over and over again, don't they? Rice, wheat germ, fatty fish, organ meats, red meat, peanuts, and unprocessed vegetable oils. However, dietary sources are only going to provide about 5 milligrams a day, and that is not enough when you're dealing with trying to actually work with congestive heart failure or disease. You need a lot higher doses.
And one of the latest studies that I saw recommended for congestive heart failure and cardiovascular disease going up to 200 milligrams or more per day.
Yes, so you need some fairly high amounts to get some good results. I'm taking 150 milligrams and noticing some good benefits from that. So you have some CoQ10 supplements. The regular CoQ10 has 30 milligrams with zinc, copper, magnesium, capsicum, hawthorn, and ginkgo, which are other circulatory benefiting nutrients. You have CoQ10 Plus, which contains 10 milligrams. It's a little lower dose, but again with a lot of circulatory things. And in that one, there's some amino acid chelates that are going to be targeted towards helping the cardiovascular system. The one I take is the CoQ10 soft gel, which is 75 milligrams in a fat-soluble base. As I understand it, the CoQ10 is more easily absorbed in a fat base than it is in a water base. You want to tell us a little bit about carotenoids?
Carotenoids, basically they're going to come from a lot of your color foods, like your reds and your oranges and your yellows. And it's the pigments in the plants that have the antioxidant properties. Carotenoids are basically a larger molecular structure than CoQ10 if you're looking at it that way, and they sit closer to the surface of the skin molecularly. So I find that the carotenoid blend works with a lot of oxidation on a skin level, where you're working from without in on some things. So because it's a sequence, like you have carotenoids, and then you have your vitamin E, and then you have your vitamin A, and then you have your CoQ10. So it's kind of going in, like we talked about with the CoQ10 being in that mitochondria of the cell. Carotenoids are more in an outer area of a protective mechanism. So the blend actually contains beta carotene, the alpha carotene, the lutein, the lycopene, also the zeaxanthin and the cryptoxanthin and the phytine and the phytofluorates and the astaxanthin and the hibiscus flower. So you can see a lot of those have the color to them as well. So it reduces the cancer risk, it protects the liver and the cardiovascular system. So
I was just admiring your ability to pronounce all those. Yeah. Well, so that basically covers most of our basic antioxidant nutrients. There are, of course, a lot more. What we want to look at in our final minutes here in the video is to talk about some of the specific antioxidant supplements that can benefit people. One of these is Perfect Eyes. We now know that a lot of eye diseases like macular degeneration, cataract formation, glaucoma, all involve oxidative damage to the eyes. Things happen as you age. This one contains a lot of different antioxidant nutrients and supplements that help prevent oxidative stress in the eyes, and therefore can help protect the eyes against deterioration that happens with aging. Do you have any comments on Perfect Eyes?
Well, I don't use it as much for the eyes, but it's a nice name.
What do you use it for besides the eyes?
I use it a lot for what you were talking about too, with the tiny capillary structures that are going on in the nose and the facial area here, and the Perfect Eye seems to work really well with that. Any type of stuff that's like skin surface wise, where you're seeing broken vessels and broken capillaries. People that are having just a hard time at higher altitudes, I use the Perfect Eyes for that. Just getting nutrient delivery, it seems to help a little bit more there. Also, when I see congestion in the interstitial tissue through the lymphatic system, I put Perfect Eyes with a lymphatic remedy, and it's helping to clear out a lot of the lymphatic system, and then it has more, the body regains its ability to detox there a little bit better.
And see, that's one of the things I like about you, is you don't stick to what the label says. You look at the ingredients and what they do, and of course this contains a lot of antioxidants that are going to have benefits way beyond just helping the eyes. Another one that we probably have similar things with is Brain Protects, which is designed to help prevent oxidative damage in the brain and nervous system tissue, because it's oxidation that causes Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementias, and other elements of the nervous system that happen with aging. And of course, again, this is going to benefit more than just the nervous system, but
well, I use the Brain Protects. A lot of times I run what's called that high sensitivity, the C-reactive protein, so the hsCRP. And that's a cardiovascular indicator. When that goes above 3, you're looking at some cardiovascular risk going on. And then you put together with that another test, the hemoglobin A1C, and when that elevates, it's talking a little bit more about your insulin, your hyperinsulinemia factors. And I actually use Brain Protects for those two when they show up in conjunction together. I will add the CoQ10 to it, but I find that the facilitator here with the Brain Protects, because of that huperzine in it, works with just transport. So you're actually, it's like going out and hiring a bunch of bus drivers to drive the bus around, because it's going to help, and the alpha lipoic acid in there with the glutathione conversion goes into that phase 2 detoxification, that sulfation pathway in the liver. So a lot of times I'll put Brain Protects in when I'm doing a liver cleanse to help support another pathway in the liver.
Wow. Very good uses. Now, of course, another major antioxidant supplement is the Tigo, which contains a variety of different antioxidant fruits and herbs, including the mangosteen, which has the xanthones, the wolfberry, which is rich in vitamin C, the green tea we've talked about. And of course, you've done quite a bit of research on xanthones, so you want to tell us a little bit about some of the things that you can do with this kind of antioxidant.
Well, with the xanthone capability, what you're looking at is reducing definitely 2 of these subclinical markers of disease that we talked about, the inflammation and the oxidation factor going on. So when you're looking at help with depression, when you increase xanthone levels in the body, your intake of xanthones, you're looking at some anti-arthritic things, and that's not only just due to the anti-inflammatory action, but it's due to some structural issues that the xanthones help as well. You're also looking at balancing out some of the pH values with the xanthones. What I look at is the neuromuscular factor in there, that linkage. Not only just taking down inflammatory status and connective tissues, but you're going in and it's like getting those pathways realigned again, that you're getting neurotransmitter activity and you're getting nerve ending firings going on. So it's helping with degeneration in neuromuscular structures. And there's been over 1,000 papers that have been published on xanthone activity, and some of them are from mangosteen and some of them from other sources, because you have xanthones and other things other than just the mangosteen fruit. But there's about 1,000 different research papers out now on how you can receive the beneficial effects of xanthones with proven results.
That's terrific. Now, in the last few minutes here, we'll just quickly go over a couple other things that are beneficial. One of them is super antioxidant, which is another supplement that contains a variety of antioxidants and things that help with liver detoxification. This is one that you could take just as a basic antioxidant. Do you have any experience with this one?
I use the super antioxidant in a lot of cardiovascular issues, so I put it together with the formula HS2. A lot of times, or I'll put it together with capsicum, garlic, and parsley, because some of your factors in there, not only the alpha lipoic acid, again with the hyperinsulinemia factor, but with the tocotrienols in there, and working on cardiovascular. Anytime I've had somebody on prescription high blood pressure medications, I'm always going to put them on the super antioxidant.
Great. Well, where inflammation is a more specific problem, and you're not just concerned about free radical damage, but you're also wanting to bring down the inflammation, one of the good formulas we have is IF Relief, and this has a number of things that help with antioxidant and anti-inflammatory capabilities, including the mangosteen pericarp extract, which has some of those xanthones we were just talking about, and turmeric, which is a really good plant for helping the liver with detoxification and also reducing inflammation. I really find this one to be very beneficial. I actually took it when I had a tooth pulled and just took 2 of these every couple hours and never had to take any pain pills. Pretty impressive formula.
I use this formula a lot. With a lot of people that we've worked on inflammation factors over and over and over, and they're not reducing. And I put this together, and we work with the fats, which we're going to talk about in just a second coming up. But it really does get the inflammation down in the extremities a lot, and that's really a hard factor to work with herbally in a lot of people.
Right. And another formula that I've used with a lot of success for inflammation is the IFC, which is a Chinese herbal formula for reducing excess heat. and it helps to reduce both acute and chronic inflammation. So some of its indications are acute things like earaches, sore throats, but it also works on things like bleeding, gums, and redness and soreness and swelling in the body. You had some experience with that?
I do use IFC. I use it for hyperthyroidism because you have a hypermetabolic rate going on there, and that's usually when the TSH numbers go low. And people that have been on Synthroid and other thyroid medications to reduce some of that superheated effect. A lot of times I'll use it when people have a hormone imbalance with the estrogens and they're having the hot flashes, and that seems to help a lot of women, as well as adding the selenium to that, but helping with the hot flashes.
Great. Well, we're just coming to the end of our time, and our next topic we probably could spend another hour on, but we're going to have to kind of wrap it up real quick, and that is the importance of fats. Because fats are really important to aging, and we're being told over and over again this thing, low-fat diet, low-fat diet, low-fat diet, as an anti-aging thing, and it's really not true. What we need is to avoid the bad fats and eat good fats, because good fats are actually going to help reduce inflammation, reduce oxidative stress, and help our bodies work better. And so we're talking about things like your omega-3s, flaxseed oil, hemp seed oil, avocados, nuts, and coconut oil are all excellent sources of good fat. So Kim, just tell us briefly some of the benefits of good fats, why we want to eat good fats and not just have low fat.
Well, and especially in the coconut oil, doing the virgin cold press. But what you're doing with your fats is you get that glycerol combustion. So you're increasing the mitochondria activity in the cell. So that's like a little spark plug. So when you do that, the cell's able to release the toxins, and then it has room to bring in the nutrients. So you're actually nourishing the cells so that you're not getting abnormal cell replication. You're also teaching the body to run on fats. Why does the body manufacture fat cells? To store toxins. So if you start teaching the body and training it that the fats are available and coming in, it's not going to hold on to the fats, and you're going to start releasing the toxins. So it teaches the body not to run on insulin with the hyperinsulinemia and going into cardiovascular factors. It's teaching you to burn the toxins off. So when they talk about fats and they say, oh, do a low-fat diet, it's just because they deemed the American public or just stupid and saying, well, we're just going to lump them all into one category and say, okay, these are fats, just avoid them. Because they didn't think that we could handle separating good fats and bad fats, because they didn't want to spend they didn't want to spend the dollars to educate the consumer. So you just need to distinguish. So yeah, not doing the trans fats, doing your good fats. And even though coconut oil is a saturated fat, the virgin cold press, it's a good fat. So increasing the avocados, increasing your olive oil, virgin cold press, increasing your raw nuts in your diet, and making sure those are the first couple of bites of every meal, because that's going to retrain the body not to run on the insulin. And there's a really great book out there, since we can't cover this topic fully like we would like to, and it's called Eat Fat, Lose Fat, and that's by Shirley Fallon with Mary Enoch. So get the book. It has great recipes, and it has help in there and understanding why you have the fats and how they reduce inflammation and help you not run on insulin.
Yeah, and we have a video called Good Fats, Bad Fats, which also shows about the fatty acid pathways and goes into detail about how these are broken down into prostaglandins that help mediate inflammation and so forth. And we also have a bonus on this particular program. Following this, there's another clip of a interview that Kim and I did with Dr. Hugo Rodier, a medical doctor, about oxidative stress and inflammation and xanthones and things we can do to counteract aging. So be sure and watch that little bonus clip as well. In summary, you can reduce the risk of chronic and degenerative disease and slow the aging process by 1, eating lots of fresh fruits and vegetables and good fats, avoiding chemicals in processed foods, and using anti-inflammatory and antioxidant supplements where appropriate to help reduce inflammation and oxidative stress. So here's to all of us staying young and healthy as we get older. most Americans will assume that as we get older, we're going to be prone to all kinds of chronic and degenerative diseases, and there's nothing that we can do about it. 1 out of 2 people in this country die of heart disease, 1 out of 3 of cancer. Most elderly people get arthritis and other degenerative diseases, deterioration of the mind and so forth. But there is something we can do about this. These diseases don't develop overnight. And there's no point in waiting around until we have one of these diseases and then treat it symptomatically with medical drugs, when we can understand that there's an underlying cause going on that's creating these diseases, and it takes about 20 years for them to develop fully. And if we work on our health earlier, we can prevent many of these illnesses. And that's the main factor that we need to focus on in this country, is more about prevention instead of just treatment. So I'm Stephen Horne. I'm a professional herbalist and a former president of the American Herbalist Guild, and a teacher, author, and consultant in the field of natural health. And with me today to discuss the topic of inflammation and oxidative stress and its effect on aging and chronic and degenerative diseases is Dr. Hugo Rodier, who's a medical doctor, a board-certified family practitioner. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Utah Medical School and the College of Health and the College of Nutrition. Also with me today is Kimberly Ballas, a board-certified naturopath who has done extensive research in blood chemistry and nutrition, and has also completed a year-long study in xanthones, a powerful antioxidant. Thank you two for being with us today. Kim, would you start out by telling people what is inflammation?
It's the body's initial response to irritation, tissue damage, and infection.
Okay, so what happens when we get inflammation? What's going on?
Well, we have heat, we have swelling, we have redness, we have pain. All of these things occur to let us know that there's inflammation going on somewhere in the body.
Great. Dr. Rodier, what's taking place in the tissues when we have an inflammatory process going on?
The main thing is that the cell membranes, that is wrapping the lining of cells in your body, is nothing but 100 trillion cells, becomes very defective. So cell membranes tend to become leaky, and they lose the ability to communicate with other cells. So, it's really remarkable that the last 7 years, the research going into medicine and biology has focused on cell communication. In essence, when cell membranes, the tissues, are inflamed and oxidized, they lose the ability to communicate and act as a whole.
Also, in other words, it messes up the body's ability to act in unity then.
Exactly. What we got here is a failure to communicate.
Well, that's great. Well, what are some of the symptoms? You mentioned the heat, swelling, redness, and pain. What are some of the things, Kim, that are causing that when this problem takes place, the heat, swelling, redness, and pain?
We've got oxidation at the site of damage.
Okay.
So we've got all of these free radicals that are spinning off and damaging healthy cells and trying to pair up with another electron that it doesn't have. Then we've got all of the capillaries, the swelling, the dilation of the pores, everything going on that, like Hugo was talking about, Dr. Rodier was talking about with the blood cells in the area.
Okay. Yeah, I had an interesting thing, because way back in 1983, I worked with Dr. C. Samuel West at the International Academy of Lymphology, and he was teaching that trapped blood proteins were the underlying cause of disease and death. What he's really talking about is the plasma proteins that leak into the tissue spaces when tissues get damaged. That cell membranes rupture in tissue damage, and that releases histamine and bradykinin, which are some of these chemical messengers you're talking about, that dilate the capillary pores, and so the first thing you get is fluid and protein rushing into the tissue spaces, and then that's followed by a cascade of other activities that create the heat, swelling, and redness and pain associated with inflammation. But that's normal, right? That's healthy, right?
Sure. The problem is when inflammation is carried on for too long and too dramatically, because we're not doing anything to fix the original inflammatory signal. So the body continues to try to alert us, but we're not paying attention. We continue to eat poorly, we continue to live in toxic environments, so the body has no choice but to continue the high alarm system of inflammation. Steve, I love history. We've always known that inflammation is the root of all diseases. The Romans, the Greeks, Ethiopians, they always said that. In fact, 150 years ago, the concept of inflammation being at the heart of all diseases was brought up in the scientific world by Virchow, Dr. Virchow in Vienna. Of course, nobody listened to him, but now, I tell you, you must have been living on the moon not to have heard that all diseases, particularly heart disease, arthritis, are inflammatory diseases.
So in other words, it's normal that we have this inflammatory process when tissues get damaged, but this is an ongoing chronic inflammation, low-grade inflammation that's causing these degenerative diseases to develop. Am I correct?
Exactly.
Yes.
And it's one of the 6 subclinical markers for all diseases, is the chronic inflammation. We have oxidative stress, we have free calcium index, we have the pH imbalance, but we have the anaerobic activity of the cells, and chronic inflammation is one of those subclinical markers of all disease.
Yeah, are those kind of interrelated? Do they like play off of one
They
another?
all play off from each other, and we begin with the pH, and then we also have with the chronic inflammation in there. So when one of the terrain elements go out of balance, then everything's out of balance, and then it gives you the environment for the inflammation.
Yeah, this is
to
getting
occur.
into the biological terrain theory of disease, because I've always felt like that when you get inflamed tissue, then that is tissue that's more prone to infection, rather than always if infection initiating the inflammatory response. I think sometimes tissue gets damaged, and it's the damage that emits the infection. What do you think of that as a medical doctor?
Well, that's exactly right. In fact, Pasteur, we all know that he came up with vaccines and bugs and all that. But he also said that it's not the germ, it's the terrain creating the problem. And now we live in a world where the last Nobel Prize went to H. pylori. I feel sorry for this little bacteria, because now we're blaming another bug for another disease. No, there are very good studies showing that the H. pylori, that bacteria associated with ulcers,
Yes.
is merely taking advantage of the inflamed terrain in the stomach. In other words, the lining of the stomach is already inflamed and oxidized, and H. pylori already lives there. It's just that the breakdown of the terrain, the tissue, creates the perfect environment for H. pylori to dive in there and do what H. pylori does. That is, feed on very fertile ground. And so now, the poor bug is taking all the credit for the ulcer, when I believe the problem was already there because the tissues were poorly antioxidized. They were poorly nourished. You see?
And we have all the trans fatty acids coming in and everything that's creating this inflammation, this oxidation going on with the diet, the poor food choices, again, the glycemic index, increasing the insulin factors that were insulin burning people instead of fat burning, and that creates a lot of this inflammatory response as well.
Very good points. In fact, about 30 years ago, we demonized fat. We began to preach to people that fat was going to kill you and make you fat. It was just a way to sell cholesterol-lowering drugs. So what did people do? They turned to refined sugars. That's when the obesity epidemic began. And so you mentioned these 2 food groups. It turns out that by eating the right fats, unsaturated, polyunsaturated fats, you lower inflammation. Now people have so demonized fats that they have turned to refined sugars. And refined sugars, particularly when cooked at high heat, high temperatures, release what we call age products. Age, very appropriate, because you age faster when you eat processed sugar. But these H molecules, advanced glycosylated end products, are causing more inflammation on the cell membrane. In fact, the cell membranes are now beginning to, they're creating receptors. Rage, how convenient that is. Rage, inflammation, redness. We are already creating our own receptors for these molecules because the cell membrane wants to understand what's happening to it. And so, bad foods, low fat, good fats, and high refined sugars, perfect prescription for inflammation.
Yeah. One of the things I think is really interesting is the Latin term for inflammation is itis. So I remember hearing years ago that an herbalist wrote that the only reason to keep the knowledge of medicine in a dead language, i.e. Latin, was to confuse and deceive people, because it makes it so ordinary people can't understand what you're talking about. So basically when we talk about arthritis, bronchitis, appendicitis, but we're just naming the part of the body that's inflamed, right?
Exactly. And what's sad is that practically all diseases have an inflammatory component. We know that depression, Schizophrenia, bipolar disorder are inflammatory conditions. We know that arthritis, asthma are inflammatory conditions, colitis, heart disease are inflammatory conditions. Even cancer is an inflammatory condition. That's why the Lancet, one of the best journals in Europe, had a great article saying, or the title of the article was, Back to Virchow, meaning back to the concept that inflammation is behind so many diseases.
And don't you find that there's a lot of inflammation in all your autoimmune disorders as well?
Sure. You know, it's because the immune system is distraught.
It's
with
overreacting.
And compounding that is our poor diets and toxins. And remember that most of the immune system is in the intestines. And most people have inflamed intestines.
Yeah, and I just read something very interesting, that there's a hormone released from fat, I think it's called leptin, that is supposed to increase your metabolism and reduce your appetite when you gain weight, but that inflammation blocks that messenger. So basically that's why when you're inflamed, you have a hard time losing weight. So getting the inflammation down is actually an important key in being able to lose weight over time.
Exactly. In fact, the whole thing about weight loss and inflammation is turning out to be a metabolic problem. That is how we produce energy. Everything is energy in our bodies, in the universe, in politics, but we're not going to get into that. But it turns out that our bodies are desperately trying to make energy, and we call it metabolism. But it's just like any engine, you know. The process of making energy, which you have to fuel with good food and good air and good water, is going to make inflammatory molecules as a byproduct. We call it combustion, products of combustion. There are different names for these agents, you know, oxidants, free radicals, reactive oxygen species. It's all the same thing. They're products of combustion. They need to be neutralized. If you don't, then you're going to have inflammatory oxidating conditions in the tissues.
Well, obviously, inflammation is a serious problem. So Kim, what are some things we can do about it?
Well, it's like Dr. Rodier was saying, you have this combustion, this energy production, and you have this residual toxins that come off with the cells, and that free radical production that occurs. So we need to scavenge, or to put out those little fires that those free radicals are causing. And one way we can do that is with antioxidants. And the antioxidants is like the xanthones, which are a very powerful form of antioxidants, is what I've done all the research with. And it's actually been shown to increase hemoglobin counts with the xanthone product, the raw xanthones, that carries more oxygen to our cells to help us combat this situation. We also prevent the oxidative stress, which a lot of the oxidative stress comes from excess iron. Iron is your oxidant, and your fats are your antioxidants. So again, we're back to this low-fat diet not working because it doesn't make enough antioxidants.
Okay, so what are these xanthones we were talking about?
Xanthones come from the pericarp of the mangosteen fruit in an extracted process from the rind portion, okay, or the pericarp. And that extraction gives us a very potent antioxidant property from the mangosteen.
And you've done some research with these, Pastor. What have been some of your experience with using the xanthones?
We've had a lot of success. We were talking about how inflammation occurs as a typical scenario with a lot of the autoimmune disorders. So we've had a lot of success with reducing chronic inflammation in the autoimmune disorders. We've had some really good success stories with Raynaud syndrome, with MS, with fibromyalgia, a lot of the toxic buildup in there being neutralized.
That's great. I know you have some information on some of the scientific studies. I understand this has been really, well scientifically researched.
There are over 1,000 reports that have been published on xanthones alone, showing how it's anti-aging, that it's anti-inflammatory, it can help with cardiovascular disease, that it can help with histamine responses, with allergies. We've seen just numerous benefits in these studies.
Great. Maybe we could ask, Dr. what are some of the things that you also could add to on what we can do to help reduce inflammation?
To me, the most important thing is to change people's diets. I find that most people are addicted to sugar. By so doing, they skip out on good fats. They're getting a lot of transhydrogenated fats in their diet and a lot of saturated fats. If they were to eat more olives, more avocados, more nuts, more fish, they'd be getting better fats. They'd be fuller, so they wouldn't have to depend on sugar, refined sugar. And so after that is done, I believe that supplementation has a big place in healing people. So I like to supplement antioxidants like Zanzones, and there are others, of course. And so it just depends on how gung-ho a person might be about supplementation. I also like to clean out the intestines, the liver in people, because that's their main way of reducing inflammation. A great article in the journal Rheumatology 2 years ago saying that inflammation is below the surface, meaning the intestines. And so we have many articles coming out pointing towards the intestines. And of course, that's a reflection of the poor diets we're eating.
Yeah. Well, another thing I'd like to add that I think really contributes to the inflammation is stress, because the adrenals secrete cortisol, which is a hormone that's supposed to reduce inflammation and help initiate a healing process in the body to try to get the inflammation under control and start the process of repair. Where people are abusing their adrenals with caffeine and sugar and just excessive stress, the adrenals get very worn out, and of course they don't produce that. And so people are being given, for these inflammatory conditions, corticosteroid drugs, and we know that that's just mimicking the body's natural cortisol. But what we really want to do is get the adrenals back, producing their own cortisol and help people reduce their stress level.
Well, and with the diet, a lot of people are not going to take the time and effort in their lifestyle, unfortunately. No matter how much you educate them, a lot of times they're going to opt out for fast food anyway. So one of our super fast foods we could use would be a greens product, that we could take that with organic greens with the xanthones in it to reduce the inflammation. The organic greens in there can supply us with some of the 5 to 7 servings a day that's recommended by the Cancer Institute for nutrition. So we have one formula with the greens in it that would help with that. Not replacing our dietary needs that we need to take responsibility for, but helping us instead of reaching for the fast food as an alternative.
Yeah, like some healthy fast food with some powdered greens that are going to give you some nutrition instead of some of the bad stuff. Also, we've talked about the good fats, and the good fats are real important because the omega-3 essential fatty acids are necessary to make the little chemical messengers that tell the cells to heal. And the ones that actually create inflammation are created from the omega-6 essential fatty acids. And so part of the reason why we're not healing from the inflammation is we're just not getting the good fats in our diet.
And some of the greens will contain the good fats. The algae, the spirulina, those contain some of the fats that we need in addition to supplementing with our diet.
Which is why grass-fed animals have a lot more omega-3 essential fatty acids in their bodies than do the grain-fed ones. Okay, I think one of the other things that we might mention, that again, this goes back to what Dr. West talked about, and something that I don't see talked about in the literature, but it's so obvious to me with my years of experience, that since there's this fluid that gets into the tissue spaces when you get inflammation, the only way that gets out is to be pumped through the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system requires movement and deep breathing. And so when people are sedentary and they're breathing shallowly and they're not moving, that keeps that fluid in the tissues, and that tends to hold the inflammatory state there. And it's one of the reasons why massage and other things work, is because it moves lymph and gets that healing. Kim, with the blood chemistry, what are some of the things that if a person had a blood test that would show that they probably have chronic underlying inflammation?
One of the markers that I look for is the monocytes, the eosinophils, and the basophils. When those are added together, that it's greater or equal than 8% is pretty much a good chronic inflammation indicator. And like Dr. Rodier talked about, the elevated C-reactive protein in the studies, it's been shown with the hyperinsulinemia as well. Also a decreased albumin globulin ratio. And then the elevated liver enzymes like the ALT and the AST have been some indicators that there's some kind of underlying chronic inflammation going on in the body. Also, I tend to look at the low density lipoproteins. When that goes high, it tends to be more of an inflammatory indicator as well.
Okay. So give us quickly some of these studies, what some of these studies have shown about the benefits of the xanthones, Kim.
Well, and some of the papers that we were talking about, there's about 1,000 scientific different papers on this, and it's increasing more every day. They actually have xanthone research going on. And there's over 100 different effects that have been noted, some of them which are, we've talked about protection against aging, the anti-aging process, anti-fatigue, the energy booster, as an analgesic to help pain prevention. They have, the xanthones actually contain like a COX-2 inhibitor. Antifungal and antibacterial, and arteriosclerotic, preventing plaque rupture, cardiovascular protective agents, immune responses, lowering blood sugar, and the list just goes on as the health benefits of showing how much free radical damage we have actually been having.
I mean, maybe this is just, obvious, but since a lot of those things to me seem to be spin-offs of inflammation and oxidative damage, and basically what we're talking about is that we get some good antioxidants that can really go a long way in terms of preventing a lot of these other conditions that are cascades from coming down from that. So I think this is something that everyone can benefit from, is to know that if they can get more good fats, get the sugar out of their diet, maybe get some moderate physical activity, and take some antioxidant supplements, they're going to go just a long way to preventing a lot of these illnesses, just with those few basic things that they can do. Do you have anything to add to that, Dr. Ruddy?
2 years ago, the Journal of the American Medical Association published a great report, page 358, 2004, showing the very basis of disease, and Kim alluded to them: inflammation, oxidation, mitochondrial dysfunction, and toxicity of the cell membrane. And it's not that it has not been said in other journals, but when the JAMA talks about this, I tell you, I believe that if doctors don't start to emphasize this, the very roots of disease, soon they're going to lose the confidence of their patients. And this has been predicted in many journals, that we need to put practical nutrition at the forefront of clinical medicine.
Great, thank you. And Kim, you had a couple of stories. Can you relate to a couple of those stories that you've done with just giving people the xanthones in your experiments or in the last year?
We've done some different trials with this for some willing participants that were willing to take a little bit larger milligram of the xanthones, and we've tried to modulate in the formulation, a daily amount of the xanthones. But in some of the chronic situations, we had to use the higher milligram content, and some of those was with the MS situation, really high chronic inflammation going on to the point that it was aggravating the nerves even more, not being able to sit without having severe pain, or even losing loss of feeling in the legs. And by using the xanthones over a 2-week period of time, started reducing the inflammation, reducing pain substantially, so that they could sit and actually get up and walk around instead of being like wheelchair prone all day long. Another situation we had was with someone with Raynaud's syndrome that had the swelling, coldness in the hands, and hadn't been able to really grip anything, and had gone through the whole medical route for about 4 years with not any success of trying the prednisone, all the anti-inflammatories, and was able after just 3 days on the xanthones to play golf again. And to grab like the lawn clippers to trim some shrubs and stuff. So we have some amazing testimonials, people that have had relief from allergy symptoms, like almost instantaneously with taking the higher amounts of xanthan. So it's just really supporting with all of these testimonies, and like this being this really amazing free radical scavenger, it's just supporting the whole fact of how the underlying cause is this chronic inflammation going on. And now the medical journals are really starting to get it with the chronic inflammation. So we're getting more studies to back up what we're doing so that people can see how important the diet and the supplementation is, instead of just taking a prescription for it.
Yeah, which is just basically doing nothing more than palliating symptoms. It's not really contributing to the body healing what's going on with the underlying cause. Well, I appreciate both of you in sharing your valuable information with us. And as you can see, there is something that we can do to help prevent these chronic and degenerative diseases in our life. We don't have to just sit around and wait for something bad to happen. We can actually become proactive and start doing something now to stay healthier. And by doing things to reduce the amount of inflammation and oxidative damage in our body through some dietary modification, especially getting rid of all of the sugar and simple carbohydrates, eating more good quality fats, getting some moderate exercise and learning to deep breathe, and taking some supplements that have antioxidant benefits such as the xanthones, we can go a long way to keeping ourselves healthy and improving our chances of living a long and healthy life. So thank you both for being here, and we hope that you put this information to good use in your life.